The August sun blazed over the small town of Cedar Falls, Arizona, casting long shadows across the dusty parking lot of Miller's Rest Stop. The heat shimmered off the asphalt like a living thing, distorting the air and making the distant mountains dance on the horizon. It was the kind of day that made people irritable, the kind of day when tempers ran short and patience wore thin. Richard Harrington III pulled his gleaming black Mercedes into the parking lot, the vehicle's polished surface reflecting the harsh sunlight like a mirror. He was a man accustomed to the finest things in life. His tailored Italian suit cost more than most people earned in 3 months. His watch, a limited edition Patek Philippe, was worth more than the entire Rest Stop building. Everything about him screamed success, wealth, and an unshakable confidence that bordered on arrogance. Beside him sat his son Tyler, a 12-year-old boy with sandy hair and his mother's gentle eyes. Tyler was different from his father in almost every way. Where Richard saw the world through the lens of profit margins and social status, Tyler saw wonder in simple things. He collected rocks, loved animals, and had a heart that seemed too big for his small chest. Richard stepped out of the Mercedes, straightening his jacket with practiced precision. He grimaced at the surroundings. This was not his usual territory. His world consisted of 5-star restaurants, exclusive country clubs, and boardrooms with panoramic views. But they were on a road trip to visit Tyler's grandmother, and even Richard Harrington III occasionally needed to stop for gas. The Rest Stop was modest but clean. A small convenience store attached to a gas station, with a diner on one side that served truckers and travelers passing through. The smell of coffee and grilled burgers drifted through the air, mixing with the scent of gasoline and desert sage. As Richard walked toward the store, his expensive Italian loafers crunching on the gravel, he noticed a motorcycle parked near the entrance. It was a Harley-Davidson, weathered and road-worn, covered in dust from countless miles of travel. The chrome was scratched, the leather seat cracked from years of sun exposure. It looked like it had stories to tell, adventures etched into every imperfection. Leaning against the bike was a man who seemed to embody the machine's rugged character. He was in his late 40s with a salt and pepper beard that reached his chest and hair pulled back in a ponytail. His leather vest was faded, adorned with patches that spoke of brotherhood and service. One patch read, Desert Eagles MC. Another displayed an American flag. A third simply said, Veteran. His name was Samuel Ghost Morrison, though few people called him Samuel anymore. He had earned the nickname Ghost during his 3 tours in the Middle East, where his ability to move silently and appear when least expected had saved countless lives, including his own. Now, 20 years later, the war was behind him, but its echoes remained in the lines on his face and the distant look that sometimes clouded his eyes. Ghost had stopped at Miller's Rest Stop for water and a moment of shade. The desert was unforgiving, and even a seasoned rider knew better than to push through the hottest part of the day without rest. He had been on the road for 3 days, riding from California to Texas to visit a dying friend from his unit. Another brother fading away, another goodbye. Richard Harrington noticed Ghost immediately, and his lip curled in undisguised disdain. To Richard, this man represented everything he despised: the dirty clothes, the unkempt appearance, the lifestyle that seemed to reject everything Richard had worked so hard to achieve. In Richard's world, success was measured by appearances, and this man appeared to have none. Tyler, however, saw something different. He saw the patches on Ghost's vest, the worn hands that spoke of hard work, and the kind eyes that seemed to carry both sadness and strength. Tyler had always been drawn to people his father dismissed. It was one of the many things that frustrated Richard about his son. Ghost pushed himself off his bike and walked toward the store entrance, his boots heavy on the concrete. His throat was parched, and he needed water before continuing his journey. As he reached for the door handle, Richard stepped directly into his path. For a moment, the two men stood facing each other. Richard, in his pristine suit and polished shoes, representing wealth and status. Ghost, in his dusty leather and faded jeans, representing something else entirely. Something Richard could not understand and did not want to. "Excuse me," Ghost said quietly, his voice a low rumble like distant thunder. He had no desire for confrontation. He just wanted water and shade. Richard did not move. Instead, he looked Ghost up and down with an expression of theatrical disgust. "You know," Richard said loudly, ensuring everyone within earshot could hear, "I've always wondered what rock people like you crawl out from under." The words hung in the air like poison. A trucker filling his rig at a nearby pump looked up. A young mother hurrying her children to the restroom paused. Even the desert wind seemed to hold its breath. Ghost said nothing. He had faced worse. He had been shot at, nearly blown up, watched friends die in his arms. Words from a man in a fancy suit meant nothing to him, but that did not mean they did not sting. "Look at you," Richard continued, warming to his audience. "Covered in dirt, smelling like motor oil, riding around on that piece of junk like some kind of outlaw. Do you even contribute anything to society, or do you just take up space and frighten decent people?" Tyler tugged at his father's sleeve. "Dad, stop. Please." Richard shrugged off his son's hand without looking at him. "Stay out of this, Tyler. You need to learn something. In this world, there are winners and losers, successful people and parasites." He gestured at Ghost. "This is what failure looks like, son. Remember it." Ghost met Richard's eyes. There was no anger there, no resentment, just a deep, weary sadness. He had seen so much hatred in the world, so much cruelty born from fear and ignorance. This man was not evil. He was simply blind. "Sir," Ghost said calmly, "I don't want any trouble. I just want to buy some water and be on my way." "Water?" Richard laughed, a sharp, mocking sound. "Can you even afford it? Or should I check if my wallet is still there after standing this close to you?" The accusation was clear. Richard was calling Ghost a thief based on nothing but his appearance. It was ugly, petty, and deeply unfair. But Ghost had learned long ago that responding to hatred with hatred only created more darkness. "Have a good day, sir," Ghost said quietly. He stepped around Richard and entered the store, the door closing behind him with a soft chime. Richard turned to his son with a satisfied smirk. "You see, Tyler? That's how you handle people like that. You don't give them an inch. They'll walk all over you if you show weakness." Tyler said nothing, but his eyes followed Ghost through the store window, watching as the biker quietly paid for his water and exchanged a few words with the elderly cashier. There was kindness in Ghost's face as he spoke to her, a gentleness that seemed impossible given what Tyler's father had just said about him. Inside the store, Ghost handed the cashier a $20 bill for a $2 bottle of water. "Keep the change, ma'am," he said softly. "Looks like you've got a long shift ahead." The cashier, a woman named Dorothy who had worked at Miller's for 30 years, smiled warmly. "You're one of the good ones," she said. "Don't let people like that get you down. They don't know what they're looking at." Ghost nodded, tucking the water into his vest. "Never do, ma'am. Never do." He stepped back outside into the blinding sunlight. Richard had moved on, now speaking loudly into his phone about some business deal, his voice carrying across the parking lot like a pronouncement. Tyler stood alone by the Mercedes, his eyes still on Ghost. For a moment, their gazes met. Ghost saw something in the boy's face. Shame. Embarrassment. And something else. An apology that Tyler did not know how to voice. Ghost walked toward him, and Tyler tensed, expecting anger or retaliation. Instead, Ghost simply crouched down to the boy's level and spoke softly, so only Tyler could hear. "Your dad doesn't speak for you," Ghost said. "Remember that. You get to choose who you become." Then he stood, nodded once, and walked back to his motorcycle. The engine roared to life, a deep, rumbling sound that seemed to shake the very air. Ghost pulled out of the parking lot and headed east, toward the mountains, toward his dying friend, toward whatever waited down the endless ribbon of road. Tyler watched him go until the motorcycle was just a speck on the horizon, then nothing at all. He would remember this moment for the rest of his life. He just did not know yet how important it would become. Richard finished his phone call and gestured impatiently for Tyler to get back in the car. "Come on." We've wasted enough time in this dump. Your grandmother is expecting us by dinner." They pulled back onto the highway, the Mercedes air conditioning a stark contrast to the brutal heat outside. Richard drove fast, as he did everything. Life was a race, and Richard Harrington III intended to win. Tyler stared out the window at the passing desert, thinking about the biker and his father's cruel words. He thought about the patches on Ghost's vest. Veteran, the American flag, Desert Eagles MC. These were not the symbols of a failure. They were the marks of service, brotherhood, and sacrifice. "Dad," Tyler said quietly, "what does veteran mean?" Richard barely glanced at his son. "It means someone who was in the military." "Why?" "That man you yelled at. He had a veteran patch on his jacket." Richard snorted. "So what? Lots of people serve. Doesn't make them special. Doesn't mean they get to look like homeless people and expect respect." Tyler fell silent, but his father's words sat heavy in his chest. Something was wrong with them. Something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. And for the first time in his young life, Tyler began to question whether his father was always right. The highway stretched before them, cutting through the desert like a scar. Mountains rose in the distance, purple and ancient, indifferent to the small dramas of human beings. The sun continued its slow arc across the sky, marking time as it had for billions of years. Somewhere ahead, unseen and unknown, fate was waiting. A moment was approaching that would change everything. A moment when all of Richard Harrington's money, status, and arrogance would mean nothing. A moment when only one thing would matter: the kindness of a stranger he had treated with cruelty. But that moment had not come yet. For now, there was only the road, the heat, and the distance between two people who did not know their lives were about to intersect in a way neither could imagine. Check if you are already subscribed to this channel. Stories like this remind us that the people we judge might be the very ones who save us. Subscribe now so you never miss a story that could change how you see the world. Chapter 2. The highway wound through the Arizona desert like a serpent, rising and falling with the terrain. Richard kept the Mercedes at a steady 80 miles per hour, the cruise control maintaining perfect speed while he thought about business. His mind was already on the next deal, the next acquisition, the next victory. Tyler had fallen asleep in the passenger seat, his face pressed against the cool window glass. In sleep, he looked younger, more vulnerable. His chest rose and fell with the rhythm of dreams, innocent and untroubled. 10 miles ahead, Ghost had pulled off the highway to check his map. The old paper atlas was falling apart, held together by tape and stubbornness. GPS devices and smartphones were fine for most people, but Ghost preferred the tangible weight of paper, the act of tracing routes with his finger, the satisfaction of knowing exactly where he was in the world. He was sitting on a boulder by the roadside, drinking the last of his water, when his phone buzzed. It was a text from his friend Marcus, the man he was riding to see. "Don't rush, brother. I'm not going anywhere fast. Take your time. Enjoy the ride." Ghost smiled sadly. Marcus had been diagnosed with cancer 6 months ago. The doctors had given him a year, but he was fading faster than anyone expected. They had served together in Afghanistan, had saved each other's lives more times than either could count. Now Ghost was riding across the country to say goodbye. He tucked the phone back into his pocket and looked up at the sky. A hawk circled overhead, riding the thermal currents with effortless grace. Ghost envied the bird its freedom, its simplicity. No wars to remember, no friends to bury, no cruel strangers to forgive. But then again, the hawk never knew the joy of brotherhood either. The bond that formed when men and women faced death together, the love that transcended words or explanation. Ghost would not trade that for anything, not even peace. He climbed back on his Harley and kicked it to life. The engine's roar was a comfort, a familiar friend that had carried him through countless miles and memories. He pulled back onto the highway, heading east toward the mountains. Behind him, gaining steadily, was a black Mercedes carrying a man who had insulted him and a boy who had looked at him with something like hope. The desert was changing as they traveled east. The flat, scrubby terrain gave way to rocky outcroppings and scattered pines. They were climbing now, ascending toward the mountain passes that separated the low desert from the high country. The temperature dropped slightly, though the sun remained fierce. Richard's phone rang, and he answered it through the car's Bluetooth system. It was his assistant, Jennifer, calling about a merger that was falling apart. "Richard, the Nakamura Group is backing out. They say our terms are too aggressive." Richard gripped the steering wheel tighter. "Too aggressive? We offered them a 20% premium on their stock. What more do they want?" "They want assurances about employee retention. They're worried we'll gut their workforce." "Of course we'll gut their workforce. That's where the savings come from. That's the whole point of the acquisition." Jennifer was silent for a moment. "They seemed pretty firm, Richard. Maybe if we offered some guarantees." "No guarantees, no compromises. They either take the deal as offered or we walk away and find another target. There are plenty of companies out there begging to be bought." "Yes, Richard. I'll relay the message." The call ended and Richard shook his head in frustration. This was the problem with business today. Too many people worried about feelings and fairness. Business was not about feelings, it was about winning. About crushing the competition and coming out on top. Tyler stirred in his sleep, mumbling something unintelligible. Richard glanced at him briefly, then returned his attention to the road. The boy was too soft. Too much like his mother, who had divorced Richard 7 years ago, citing emotional unavailability and narcissistic tendencies. Richard had won custody through expensive lawyers and strategic maneuvering, but sometimes he wondered if it had been worth the effort. Tyler did not understand him, did not appreciate the sacrifices Richard made to provide for them, did not see that everything Richard did was to build a legacy, to create something lasting in a world that forgot most people before they were even cold in the ground. The road ahead curved sharply, climbing toward a mountain pass. Warning signs advised drivers to reduce speed, but Richard maintained his pace. He had driven this route before. He knew what he was doing. What he did not know was that the road ahead had been damaged by recent rains. A section of the guardrail had been weakened by erosion, and the asphalt near the outer edge was crumbling away, invisible to anyone approaching at high speed. Ghost was perhaps a mile behind them now, maintaining a steady 60 miles per hour. He had learned long ago that speed was not the same as progress. Sometimes the fastest way forward was to slow down, to pay attention, to let the road reveal itself. He saw the warning signs and eased off the throttle slightly. Mountain roads were unpredictable, especially after summer storms. The desert could go months without rain, then receive a year's worth in a single afternoon. The landscape was still recovering from exactly such a storm 3 weeks earlier. Ahead, the Mercedes disappeared around a curve, climbing toward the pass. Ghost followed at a safe distance, enjoying the changing scenery. The pines were thicker here, casting cool shadows across the road. The air smelled different, clean and green, with a hint of moisture from some hidden stream. Then he heard it, a sound that made his heart stop, the screech of tires, followed by the crunch of metal and the shattering of glass. Then silence, a terrible, pregnant silence. Ghost accelerated instantly, his body reacting before his mind could fully process what he had heard. He rounded the curve and saw the scene that would haunt his dreams for years to come. The black Mercedes had gone off the road. The damaged guardrail had given way, sending the vehicle tumbling down a steep embankment. It had rolled at least twice before coming to rest against a cluster of boulders about 50 feet below the road level. The car was crumpled, windows shattered, steam rising from the destroyed engine. Ghost was off his bike before it had fully stopped, letting the Harley fall to the ground as he sprinted toward the edge. He looked down at the wreckage, assessing the situation with the trained eye of a combat veteran. The driver's side door was crushed inward, but the passenger side appeared less damaged. He could see movement inside the vehicle. Someone was alive. Without hesitation, Ghost began climbing down the embankment, his boots finding purchase on the loose rock and scrub. It was treacherous terrain, the kind that could send a man tumbling to his death with one wrong step. But Ghost had navigated worse. He had crossed minefields in the dark, scaled walls under fire, carried wounded comrades through impossible terrain. This was nothing compared to war. This was just gravity and stone. He reached the vehicle in less than a minute, his hands already working to assess the damage. Through the shattered passenger window, he saw Tyler, the boy from the rest stop. The child was conscious, but dazed, a cut on his forehead bleeding freely. His eyes were wide with shock and terror. "Easy, son," Ghost said, his voice calm and steady. "I'm going to get you out of here, just stay still and breathe." Tyler recognized him. The biker. The man his father had insulted. The man who was now climbing into a destroyed car to save his life. "My dad," Tyler whispered. "Is my dad okay?" Ghost looked toward the driver's seat and felt his stomach clench. Richard Harrington was unconscious, pinned behind the crushed steering column. There was a wound on his head, and his breathing was shallow and irregular. He needed medical attention immediately, but extracting him would be difficult and dangerous. First things first, get the boy out, assess the father, call for help. Ghost reached through the broken window and carefully tested Tyler's range of motion. "Can you move your arms and legs? Does anything hurt really bad when you move?" Tyler wiggled his fingers, then his toes. He moved his arms slowly, wincing at the pain but confirming nothing was broken. "I think I'm okay. My head hurts. My chest hurts. But I can move." "Good. That's good. I'm going to unbuckle your seatbelt and pull you out through the window. It might hurt a little, but I need you to be brave. Can you do that for me?" Tyler nodded, tears streaming down his face. "Please help my dad. Please." "I will, son. I promise. But I need to get you safe first." Ghost reached in and released the seatbelt, then carefully maneuvered Tyler through the window opening. The boy cried out as his bruised ribs scraped against the doorframe, but he did not fight. He trusted this stranger, this man his father had called a failure and a parasite. Once Tyler was free of the vehicle, Ghost carried him up the embankment to the road. The boy weighed almost nothing in his arms, light as a bird, fragile as hope. Ghost set him down on a flat section of rock away from the edge. "Stay here," Ghost said firmly. "Don't move. I'm going back for your father." "Is he going to be okay?" Tyler's voice was small, terrified. Ghost looked into the boy's eyes. He would not lie. He had never lied to anyone facing fear. "I don't know yet, but I'm going to do everything I can. I need you to be strong. Can you do that?" Tyler nodded, wiping his tears with a dirty hand. Ghost pulled out his phone and dialed 911. The signal was weak in the mountains, but the call connected. 911, what is your emergency? Car accident on Highway 87, approximately mile marker 42 eastbound. Vehicle went off the road down an embankment. One adult male trapped in the vehicle, unconscious, possible head trauma. One juvenile male extracted, minor injuries. I need rescue crews and medical transport immediately. Sir, stay on the line. Help is on the way. Can you give me more details about the trapped individual? Ghost described Richard's condition as best he could while climbing back down toward the vehicle. The operator kept him talking, gathering information, coordinating the response. When Ghost reached the Mercedes again, he circled to the driver's side and assessed the damage more carefully. The door was hopelessly crushed, but the windshield had been partially ejected during the roll. There was an opening there if he could move carefully enough. Richard groaned, his eyes fluttering. He was regaining consciousness, which was both good and bad. Good because it meant his brain was functioning. Bad because the pain was about to become very real. "Mr. Harrington," Ghost said clearly. "Can you hear me? My name is Samuel. I'm here to help you." Richard's eyes focused slowly, confusion giving way to recognition. The biker, the dirty, worthless biker from the rest stop, the man he had humiliated in front of everyone. What happened?" Richard's voice was a croak, barely audible. "Your car went off the road. You're injured. Help is coming, but I need you to stay as still as possible. Can you feel your legs?" Richard tried to move, then gasped in pain. "Something's wrong. I can't..." Something's pinning me down. The steering column collapsed. You're trapped, but you're going to be okay. Just breathe. Stay calm. Focus on my voice. Richard stared at Ghost, his mind struggling to process what was happening. This man he had treated with such contempt, this man was saving his life. My son, Richard whispered. Tyler. Is Tyler. Your boy is safe. I got him out. He's waiting for you up on the road. He's scared, but he's okay. Richard closed his eyes, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, he felt tears sliding down his cheeks. Not tears of pain, though there was plenty of that. Tears of something else, something he did not have a name for. Why? Richard asked, his voice breaking. Why are you helping me? After what I said to you? Ghost met his eyes, and there was no anger there, no resentment, no triumph, just calm, steady compassion. Because it's the right thing to do, Ghost said simply. Because your son needs his father. Because we don't get to choose who deserves help and who doesn't. We just help. In the distance, the wail of sirens began to echo through the mountains. Help was coming. But in that moment, in the wreckage of a car that represented everything he had valued, Richard Harrington began to understand that everything he thought he knew about worth and success was wrong. Chapter 3. The rescue took nearly 2 hours. Emergency crews arrived from the nearest town, a small community called Pine Ridge that maintained a volunteer fire department and a medical response team. These were not the highly trained specialists Richard was accustomed to dealing with. They were ordinary people, teachers and mechanics and store clerks who had taken emergency response training and kept their equipment ready for exactly this kind of situation. Ghost stayed with Richard the entire time, talking to him, keeping him conscious, monitoring his breathing. When the fire crews arrived, Ghost briefed them on the situation with military precision, describing the vehicle's position, the nature of the entrapment, and his assessment of Richard's injuries. The fire chief, a weathered man named Frank Delaney, recognized Ghost's competence immediately. You military? 3 tours, Army Rangers, Ghost replied. Combat medic training. Good, stay close, we might need you. The extraction was delicate and dangerous. The vehicle was unstable on the slope, and any wrong movement could send it tumbling further down the mountainside. The crews worked with careful deliberation, using pneumatic tools to cut away the crushed metal, creating an opening large enough to pull Richard free. Through it all, Ghost stayed by the window talking to Richard, keeping him focused on something other than the pain. Tell me about your son, Ghost said. Tyler. That's his name, right? Richard nodded weakly. He's 12. Smarter than me. Kinder, too. Gets that from his mother. What does he like to do? Rocks. He collects rocks, if you can believe that. Has hundreds of them. Can tell you the name and geological history of every single one. Richard attempted a smile through his pain. I never understood it. Always thought it was a waste of time. Doesn't sound like a waste to me, Ghost said. Sounds like a kid who pays attention to the world. That's rare. That's valuable. Richard was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was different. Smaller. More honest. I've been a terrible father. I've been so focused on success, on winning, on proving myself. I forgot what actually matters. Ghost did not argue or offer false comfort. He simply listened. When I saw you at that rest stop, Richard continued, I saw everything I was afraid of becoming. Poor, unsuccessful, forgotten. I attacked you because I was attacking my own fears. It had nothing to do with you. I know, Ghost said quietly. Most cruelty comes from fear. I learned that a long time ago. You must hate me. Ghost shook his head. I don't hate anyone anymore. Hate takes too much energy. It keeps you trapped in the past. I've got enough weight to carry without adding that. The rescue crews had nearly completed their work. The metal groaned as they peeled back the last section of the crumpled door, creating an opening wide enough to carefully extract Richard from the vehicle. "Morrison," the fire chief called. "We're ready to move him. Can you help guide the extraction?" Ghost nodded and positioned himself to support Richard's head and neck as the crews carefully lifted him from the wreckage. It was slow, agonizing work, every movement calculated to minimize further injury. Richard gritted his teeth against the pain, but he did not scream. He kept his eyes fixed on Ghost's face, drawing strength from the calm presence of this man who had every reason to leave him there. Finally, Richard was free. They strapped him to a backboard and carried him up the embankment on a rescue basket, Ghost climbing alongside, never leaving his side. Tyler was waiting at the top, held back by a young paramedic who was treating the cut on his forehead. When he saw his father emerge from the slope, alive and conscious, he broke free and ran toward them. Dad, are you okay?" Richard reached out a trembling hand and touched his son's face. "I'm okay, son. I'm going to be okay. Thanks to—" He looked at Ghost, realizing he did not even know the man's name. "Samuel," Ghost said. "But most people call me Ghost." Tyler looked at Ghost with something like wonder. "You saved him. You saved my dad." "Your dad's tough," Ghost said. "He held on. The rescue crews did the hard work. I just kept him company." But Tyler knew better. He had watched from the roadside as Ghost climbed into that wreckage without hesitation, had heard his calm voice carrying across the distance, had seen the rescue crews defer to Ghost's judgment and expertise. This man, this dirty biker his father had mocked, was a hero. The paramedics loaded Richard into an ambulance, and Tyler climbed in beside him. Before the doors closed, Richard called out to Ghost. "Wait, please, I need to say something." Ghost approached the ambulance, his face unreadable. "I'm sorry," Richard said, the words feeling insufficient but necessary. "What I said to you at that rest stop, it was wrong, it was cruel, and it was completely undeserved. I'm sorry." Ghost nodded slowly. "Apology accepted. Now focus on getting better. Your son needs you." The ambulance doors closed and the vehicle pulled away, its sirens wailing as it headed toward the nearest hospital. Ghost watched it go until it disappeared around a curve in the mountain road. The fire chief approached him, extending a hand. "That was good work, friend. You probably saved that man's life. If he'd been alone out here waiting for us to arrive." Ghost shook the offered hand. "Just did what anyone would do." "No," Frank said seriously. "Not anyone. Most people would have kept driving, would have told themselves someone else would stop. You didn't. That's not nothing." Ghost retrieved his fallen motorcycle from where he had dropped it at the edge of the road. Amazingly, it was undamaged. The old Harley had survived worse. "There's a motel in Pine Ridge about 10 miles east," Frank said. "Martha's Motor Lodge. Nothing fancy, but clean and cheap. You look like you could use some rest." Ghost nodded his thanks. He was exhausted, physically and emotionally. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind the familiar emptiness that always followed crisis. He kicked the Harley to life and headed east, toward Pine Ridge, toward rest, toward whatever came next. Behind him, the rescue crews finished securing the scene. Tow trucks would come tomorrow to recover what remained of the Mercedes. The damaged guardrail would be repaired, warning signs would be updated, and the road would continue carrying travelers through the mountains as it had for decades. But something had changed on this stretch of highway. Something invisible but real. A moment of choice, a decision to help despite every reason not to. A reminder that our worth is not measured by what we own or how we appear, but by what we do when no one is watching, when nothing is expected, when the easy thing and the right thing are not the same. If you are watching this story and feeling something in your heart, something stirring, something waking up, then pause right now and leave a comment saying, "True strength is found in kindness." Say it out loud as you type it. Let those words become part of who you are, because this is the truth that changes everything. The truth that Richard Harrington was just beginning to understand, the truth that would transform his life from this moment forward. Chapter 4. Pine Ridge Regional Hospital was small by city standards, but it was well-equipped and staffed by dedicated professionals who had chosen to serve a rural community rather than chase the higher salaries of urban centers. Richard Harrington found himself in their care, grateful for their competence even as his mind struggled to process everything that had happened. The doctors determined that Richard had suffered a concussion, 3 broken ribs, a fractured collarbone, and severe bruising throughout his torso and legs. He would recover fully, but it would take time. Weeks of rest, followed by physical therapy, followed by a gradual return to normal activity. For a man who measured his worth in constant motion and perpetual achievement, the prospect of forced stillness was almost as frightening as the accident itself. Tyler had been treated and released with minor injuries. A few stitches for the cut on his forehead, some bruised ribs, and a prescription for rest and observation. He refused to leave his father's side, sleeping in a chair beside Richard's hospital bed, holding his hand through the night. Richard drifted in and out of consciousness, his dreams filled with strange images. The desert sun, the dark eyes of the biker, the feeling of being trapped, of being helpless, of being saved by someone he had treated with contempt. When he finally woke fully, it was morning. Sunlight streamed through the hospital window, painting golden rectangles on the linoleum floor. Tyler was asleep in the chair, his head tilted at an uncomfortable angle, his hand still gripping his father's. Richard looked at his son. Really looked, perhaps for the first time in years. He saw the sandy hair that needed cutting, the gentle face that so resembled his mother's. The collection of colorful rocks that spilled from Tyler's pockets onto the chair and floor, gathered even in crisis because that was who Tyler was, a boy who noticed things, a boy who valued what others overlooked. What had Ghost said? A kid who pays attention to the world. That's rare. That's valuable. Richard had never seen it that way before. He had seen Tyler's interests as distractions, as obstacles to the success Richard wanted for his son. He had pushed Tyler toward sports he did not enjoy, toward academic competitions he did not care about, toward a version of success that meant nothing to the boy himself. And all the while, Tyler had been collecting rocks, finding beauty in stones, paying attention to a world that Richard was too busy conquering to actually see. A nurse entered, checking Richard's vitals with practiced efficiency. "Good morning, Mr. Harrington. How are you feeling?" "Like I was hit by a truck," Richard replied, his voice hoarse. The nurse smiled. "That's actually a good sign. Means your nerves are working. The doctor will be in soon to discuss your recovery plan." "Nurse? The man who helped me. The one who was there before the rescue crews arrived. Do you know where he is?" The nurse nodded. "Mr. Morrison. Yes, he came by earlier this morning to check on you. He's been staying at the motel in town. Quiet man, polite. The nurses were quite impressed with how he handled the situation yesterday. Can you get a message to him? Ask him to come see me, please?" The nurse hesitated. "I can try, but I understand he's planning to continue his trip today. Said he has somewhere important to be." "Please," Richard said, and there was something in his voice that had never been there before. Humility. Genuine need. "Please try." The nurse left, and Richard lay back against his pillow, staring at the ceiling. His mind kept returning to the moment in the wreckage, to Ghost's calm voice cutting through his panic, to the simple words that had shaken something loose in his soul. "We don't get to choose who deserves help and who doesn't. We just help." Such a simple idea. So obvious, really. And yet Richard had spent his entire adult life doing the exact opposite, judging everyone, calculating their worth, deciding who was worthy of his time and attention and who could be dismissed without a second thought. He had dismissed Ghost without knowing anything about him, had assumed the worst based on appearance alone, had publicly humiliated a man who turned out to be a combat veteran, a hero, a person of profound courage and compassion. What did that say about Richard? What did it say about the way he had lived his life? Tyler stirred, opening his eyes slowly. "Dad? You're awake." "Hey, buddy." Richard squeezed his son's hand. "How are you feeling?" "I'm okay. My head hurts a little. But I'm okay." Tyler sat up, stretching his stiff neck. "Dad, I was so scared. When the car started rolling, I thought..." "I know. I was scared too." Richard paused, then said something he had not said to his son in years. "I'm sorry, Tyler." Tyler looked confused. "For what?" "For everything. For pushing you so hard. For not listening to you. For not seeing who you really are." Richard's voice cracked. "For being the kind of person who would say those things to a stranger. The kind of person who judges people by how they look instead of who they are." Tyler was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Ghost told me something. At the rest stop after what happened. He said your dad doesn't speak for you. He said I get to choose who I become." Richard closed his eyes, feeling the weight of those words. Even then, even in that moment of humiliation, Ghost had thought of the boy, had offered wisdom and comfort to a stranger's child, had planted a seed that might grow into something better than what Richard had modeled. "He's right," Richard said finally. "You do get to choose. And I hope you choose to be better than me. I don't want to be better than you, Dad." Tyler's voice was soft but firm. "I want us both to be better. Together." Richard felt tears sliding down his cheeks again, the second time in 2 days after years of refusing to cry. He pulled his son into an awkward hospital bed embrace, ignoring the pain in his ribs, holding on as if Tyler were the only real thing in a world that had suddenly shifted beneath his feet. They stayed like that for a long time, father and son, finally seeing each other clearly. Around noon, there was a knock on the hospital room door. Richard looked up to see Ghost standing in the doorway, his leather vest dusty from the road, his face weathered but kind. "I got your message," Ghost said. "Thought I'd stop by before I head out." "Please, come in." Richard gestured to the chair Tyler had vacated. "I wanted to talk to you, to thank you properly." Ghost entered but did not sit. He stood by the window, looking out at the mountains that rose behind the small town. "No thanks necessary. I just did what needed doing. It was more than that, and we both know it." Richard struggled to find the right words. "I've been thinking about what I said to you, about what you did anyway, about what kind of man does what you did for someone who treated him like I treated you?" Ghost turned to face him. "What kind of man?" "A better man than me. A good man. The kind of man I want to become." Ghost was quiet for a moment. Then he crossed the room and sat in the chair beside Richard's bed. "You want to know what I see when I look at you?" Ghost asked. "I see a man who's been running scared his whole life. Scared of failure. Scared of being seen as weak. Scared of ending up like the people he looks down on. That fear made you mean. Made you blind. But fear doesn't have to be permanent. Fear can be overcome." Richard listened, truly listened, in a way he had not listened to anyone in years. "I've known a lot of hard men," Ghost continued. "Warriors, veterans, people who've done and seen things that would break most folks. You know what separates the ones who make it from the ones who don't? It's not strength. It's not toughness. It's the ability to change, to admit when you're wrong, to grow. The strongest men I know are the ones who can look at themselves honestly and decide to be different." "Can someone really change?" Richard asked. "At my age, after all these years?" "Every day is a choice," Ghost said. "Every moment is a chance to start over. You don't become a good man by magic. You become a good man by deciding, over and over, to do the right thing, even when it's hard, even when no one's watching, especially when no one's watching." Richard looked at his son, who was listening intently to every word. "I want Tyler to be proud of me. I want to be someone worth looking up to." "Then start today. Start now. Start with the next choice you make." Ghost stood, preparing to leave. "I've got a long ride ahead, a friend waiting for me. But I'll leave you with this. The man your son saw yesterday, the man who climbed into that wreckage, that's not some special version of me. That's just me. That's who I choose to be every day. You can make that same choice. Anyone can." Ghost extended his hand and Richard took it. The handshake was firm, warm, and somehow conveyed everything that words could not. "Thank you," Richard said. For my life, for my son, for telling me the truth. Ghost nodded, then turned to Tyler. You take care of your old man, kid, and keep collecting those rocks. The world needs people who pay attention. Tyler smiled, a real smile that lit up his whole face. I will. Thank you, Ghost. Thank you for everything. Ghost walked to the door, then paused and looked back. One more thing. The best apology is changed behavior. Words are easy. Actions are what matter. Remember that. Then he was gone, his boots echoing down the hospital corridor, heading back to his motorcycle, back to the road, back to the friend who was waiting for him. Richard lay in his hospital bed, feeling something he had not felt in decades. Hope. Real, tangible hope that he could be different, that he could be better, that the man he had been did not have to be the man he remained. Tyler climbed back into his chair and took his father's hand again. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the mountains through the window, thinking about the stranger who had saved them in more ways than one. Chapter 5. Ghost rode east through the afternoon, the mountains giving way to high desert, then to rolling plains that stretched toward the horizon like an ocean of golden grass. The air grew warmer as he descended in elevation, but it was a dry heat, more bearable than the oppressive humidity of other regions. His mind kept returning to Richard Harrington and young Tyler, to the transformation he had witnessed in that hospital room, to the hope he had seen kindling in a man who had seemed beyond hope just a day before. Ghost had learned long ago not to judge people by their worst moments. Everyone had darkness in them. Everyone made mistakes. What mattered was what you did next. Whether you let your failures define you or use them as fuel for change. He had seen men commit terrible acts in war, then spend the rest of their lives atoning through service and kindness. He had seen hard men softened by love, cold men warmed by purpose. And he had seen the opposite too. Good people broken by circumstance, unable to recover, lost to bitterness and despair. The difference, as far as Ghost could tell, was choice. The willingness to keep choosing every day to be better than your worst impulses. It was not about being perfect, it was about being persistent. The highway carried him through small towns and forgotten communities, places where life moved at a different pace. He saw farmers working their fields, children playing in front yards, old men sitting on porches watching the world go by. These were the people who held the country together, Ghost thought. Not the wealthy and powerful, but the ordinary folks who raised families, helped neighbors, and kept showing up no matter how hard things got. As evening approached, he found himself in a town called Millbrook, Texas. It was larger than Pine Ridge, with a real downtown and a hospital where his friend Marcus had been admitted 3 days earlier. Ghost parked his motorcycle outside the hospital and sat for a moment, gathering his strength. This was the visit he had been dreading, the goodbye he had ridden 1,000 miles to say. He found Marcus in a private room on the 3rd floor, looking smaller than Ghost remembered. The cancer had taken its toll. The once powerful man who had carried wounded soldiers on his back, who had faced down enemy fire without flinching, was now a shadow of himself, thin, pale, fragile. But his eyes were still the same, sharp, intelligent, filled with a fierce will that refused to surrender. "Ghost," Marcus said, his voice weak but warm. "You made it." "Told you I would." Ghost pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down. "How are you feeling?" "Like death warmed over," Marcus replied with a grim smile. "Which is appropriate, I suppose." They sat in silence for a while, the comfortable silence of men who had shared experiences too profound for casual conversation. They did not need words to communicate. The bond they shared transcended language. Finally, Marcus spoke. "Tell me about your trip. I want to hear about the road." Ghost told him. About the desert sun and the mountain passes. About the rest stop and the rich businessman. About the accident and the rescue. About the transformation he had witnessed in Richard Harrington. Marcus listened intently, his eyes never leaving Ghost's face. When the story was finished, he smiled. "You always did have a gift for seeing the good in people," Marcus said. even when they couldn't see it themselves. I learned it from you, Ghost replied. You never gave up on anyone, not even me, when I was at my worst. You were never at your worst. You were just lost for a while. We all get lost sometimes. Marcus reached out and gripped Ghost's hand with surprising strength. Promise me something. Anything. Keep doing what you're doing. Keep helping people. Keep seeing the good in them, even when they don't deserve it. Especially when they don't deserve it. The world needs more of that. More people who choose kindness when cruelty would be easier. I promise, Ghost said, his voice thick with emotion. They talked through the night, sharing memories and laughter and the kind of honesty that only comes when time is short. They spoke of battles fought and friends lost, of mistakes made and lessons learned, of the strange, winding paths that had brought them both to this moment. As dawn broke over the Texas plains, Marcus closed his eyes for the last time. He went peacefully, holding his brother's hand, surrounded by the love that had sustained him through 3 decades of service and sacrifice. Ghost stayed with him until the nurses came. Then he walked out of the hospital into the early morning light, feeling the weight of loss settle onto his shoulders alongside all the other losses he carried. But he also felt something else. Gratitude for the time they had shared, for the brotherhood that transcended death, for the knowledge that Marcus's spirit would live on in everyone he had touched, including Ghost himself. He climbed onto his motorcycle and headed west, back toward the setting sun, back toward whatever came next. There were more miles to ride, more people to help, more moments of choice waiting to be made. The road stretched before him, endless and full of possibility. And Ghost rode on, carrying the memories of the fallen and the hope of the living, 1 mile at a time. 2 weeks later, Richard Harrington was discharged from the hospital. He returned home to Phoenix with Tyler, but everything was different now. The house felt too big, too empty, too full of things that no longer mattered. He began making changes immediately. He sold the Mercedes and bought a practical sedan. He donated half his wardrobe to charity and started dressing more simply. He reduced his work hours and started attending Tyler's school events, not as an obligation, but as a privilege. Tyler noticed the changes and responded with cautious hope. He started sharing more about his interests, showing his father the rocks he collected and explaining their geological significance. Richard listened, really listened, and discovered a world of wonder he had been too blind to see. They started taking weekend trips together, not to exclusive resorts or business retreats, but to national parks and roadside attractions. Tyler introduced his father to the joy of simple pleasures. Hiking through canyons, watching sunsets, finding unusual stones in riverbed. Richard began volunteering at a local veterans organization, wanting to give back to the community of people who had produced a man like Ghost. He met other veterans, heard their stories, learned about their struggles. He started a foundation to provide housing assistance to homeless veterans, funding it from his own wealth without seeking recognition or publicity. The business associates who had once admired Richard's ruthlessness were confused by his transformation. Some dismissed it as a phase, a temporary response to trauma that would fade with time. Others saw something genuine in his changed demeanor and were inspired to examine their own lives. His ex-wife, Sarah, noticed the changes too. She had always seen the potential in Richard, the good man buried beneath layers of fear and ambition. Their relationship began to thaw, though neither of them expected or sought reconciliation. What they found instead was something better, a genuine friendship based on mutual respect and their shared love for Tyler. Tyler flourished in this new environment. His grades improved, not because of pressure, but because he finally felt supported. He made friends at school, joined a geology club, and started giving presentations about the rocks he collected. His confidence grew as he discovered that his interests had value, that paying attention to the world was not a weakness but a strength. One evening, about 2 months after the accident, Tyler found his father sitting on the back porch, staring at the Arizona sky as the sun painted it in shades of orange and purple. "What are you thinking about, Dad?" Richard smiled. "That biker. Ghost. I've been trying to find him, to thank him properly, but it's like he vanished. No one knows where he went. Tyler sat down beside his father. Maybe that's the point. Maybe he doesn't want to be found. Maybe he's out there somewhere, helping someone else. Maybe. Richard put his arm around his son's shoulders. You know what I've learned from all this? What? That the most important things in life aren't the things we think they are. Success, money, status. None of that matters as much as moments like this. Sitting with you, watching the sunset, being present. Tyler leaned into his father's embrace. I'm glad you learned that, Dad. I'm glad you're different now. Me too, son. Me too. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the sky darken and the stars emerge, feeling the connection between them that had been buried for so long and was now finally free to grow. Chapter 6. A year passed. The seasons turned, bringing change and growth to the Harrington family and to the ripples their story created across the community. Richard had become a different man, unrecognizable to those who had known the ruthless businessman he once was. He had stepped back from daily operations at his company, promoting talented managers and creating profit-sharing programs for employees. The Nakamura deal, which had fallen apart that fateful summer, was eventually completed on terms that prioritized worker retention over cost savings. His Veterans Foundation had grown beyond anything he had imagined. What started as a small housing assistance program had expanded into comprehensive support services, including job training, mental health resources, and family counseling. Hundreds of veterans had been helped, their lives transformed by programs that existed because Richard Harrington had been saved by one of their own. Tyler had entered high school as a confident, compassionate young man. He was known among his peers for his kindness and his willingness to include those who felt excluded. He started a club called Rock Solid, which combined his love of geology with community service, organizing field trips for underprivileged children and donating rock samples to schools without science programs. The story of Richard's transformation had spread through his business circles, inspiring others to examine their own lives. Several of his former associates had made significant charitable commitments, some establishing foundations of their own. The ripple effect of one man's change touched more lives than anyone could count. On the anniversary of the accident, Richard and Tyler made a special trip. They drove the same highway where the accident had occurred, stopping at Miller's Rest Stop where the confrontation with Ghost had taken place. Dorothy, the elderly cashier, was still there. She recognized them immediately. I remember you two, she said, her eyes widening. You're the folks from the accident, the ones that Biker saved. That's right, Richard said. We came back to see if anyone knew where he went, if anyone had heard from him. Dorothy shook her head sadly. Haven't seen him since that day. But I remember what he said to me. He called himself one of the good ones. And he surely was. They thanked her and continued to the site of the accident. The guardrail had been replaced with a stronger barrier, and the road had been repaired. New warning signs cautioned drivers about the curves ahead. Richard stood at the edge, looking down at the slope where his car had come to rest. Tyler stood beside him. I almost died here, Richard said quietly. And in a way, I did. The man I was before the accident, the selfish, judgmental, fearful man, he died in that wreckage. Someone better was born. Tyler took his father's hand. I like who you are now, Dad. I like who we are together. They stood in silence, honoring the moment, honoring the man who had made it possible. Then Richard did something unexpected. He pulled a small stone from his pocket. It was an ordinary rock, gray and unremarkable, but Tyler recognized it instantly. Is that the first rock you ever showed me? The one I dismissed as worthless. You were 7 years old. Richard turned the stone over in his hands. I found it in my desk drawer last month. I must have kept it without realizing. All those years, I had it, and I never understood what it meant. Tyler's eyes filled with tears. What does it mean? It means you were always trying to share something beautiful with me, and I was too blind to see it. Richard handed the stone to his son. I'm sorry for every rock I ignored, every sunset I missed, Every moment I threw away because I thought I had more important things to do. Tyler accepted the stone, feeling its familiar weight in his palm. It's not too late, Dad. We have lots of moments left. You're right. Richard smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. Let's not waste any more of them. They returned to their car and continued their journey, not heading anywhere in particular, just driving through the beautiful landscape, talking and laughing and appreciating the simple gift of being together. Somewhere in Texas, Ghost was ending his own journey. He had spent the year traveling, visiting old friends, attending memorial services, and helping wherever he was needed. His friend Marcus was buried now, at peace, but his memory lived on in everyone who had known him. Ghost had heard rumors about Richard Harrington, about the transformation, about the foundation, about the businessman who had become a philanthropist after being saved by a stranger he had insulted. It made Ghost smile, not because he wanted credit or recognition. He had never sought those things, but because it confirmed what he had always believed. People could change. Given the right moment, the right choice, the right push, anyone could become better than they were. The darkness in people was real, but so was the light. And sometimes, all it took was one act of unexpected kindness to tip the balance. Ghost pulled into a rest stop somewhere in New Mexico. The sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of fire and gold. He bought a bottle of water and sat on a bench watching the light fade. A young woman approached him looking nervous. She was maybe 25, dressed in clothes that had seen better days, carrying a backpack that contained everything she owned. "Excuse me, sir," she said hesitantly. "I'm sorry to bother you. I'm trying to get to California for a job interview, but my car broke down and I don't have enough money to fix it. I'm not asking for a handout, but I thought maybe... I don't know. I'm sorry. This was stupid." Ghost looked at her for a long moment, saw the desperation she was trying to hide, the hope she was afraid to feel, the courage it had taken to approach a stranger. "What kind of job?" he asked. "Teaching. At a school for kids with special needs. It's my dream job. The interview is day after tomorrow, but I don't know how I'm going to get there now." Ghost stood and walked to his motorcycle. He opened his saddlebag and pulled out an envelope he kept for emergencies. Inside was cash, enough to cover unexpected situations on the road. He counted out several $100s and handed it to the young woman. "This should cover your repairs and then some. Get to that interview. Get that job. Change some lives." The woman stared at the money in disbelief. "I can't. This is too much. I can't accept." "You're not accepting anything," Ghost said. "You're borrowing. Someday, when you're able, you'll help someone else who needs it. That's how it works. That's how we keep the light alive in a dark world." Tears streamed down the woman's face. "Why are you doing this? You don't even know me." Ghost smiled, remembering Richard Harrington asking him the same question in the wreckage of his Mercedes. "Because it's the right thing to do. Because we don't get to choose who deserves help and who doesn't. We just help." He climbed onto his motorcycle and kicked it to life. The woman stood watching, still clutching the money, still struggling to believe this was real. "Thank you," she called out. "Thank you so much. I'll never forget this." Ghost nodded once, then pulled out of the rest stop and headed west, toward the setting sun, toward whatever waited down the road. The woman watched him go until he was just a speck on the horizon. Then she looked down at the money in her hand and felt something shift inside her, something that had been asleep for a long time. Hope. Real, tangible hope. She walked back to the garage where her car was being repaired, paid for the work, and continued her journey to California. 3 days later, she got the job. 5 years later, she ran her own school for children with special needs. 20 years later, she was a leader in educational reform, her programs helping thousands of students across the country. And she never forgot the dirty biker at the rest stop who had handed her an envelope of cash and told her to change some lives. She told the story often, at conferences and graduations and quiet conversations with struggling colleagues. Sometimes she said, "Angels don't look like angels. Sometimes they wear leather vests and ride motorcycles and smell like engine oil. But you recognize them by what they do. by how they treat the people everyone else has given up on, by the way they see potential where others see nothing at all. Richard Harrington never found Ghost, but he found something better. He found the person he was always meant to be. He found connection with his son, peace with his past, and purpose in his future. Every year on the anniversary of the accident, he returned to that stretch of highway and stood at the spot where his old life had ended and his new one had begun. Sometimes Tyler came with him. Sometimes he went alone. But he always brought something to leave behind. A small donation to the local fire department, a letter of thanks to the nurses at Pine Ridge Regional Hospital, a rock from Tyler's collection placed at the base of the new guardrail. These were his offerings, his way of honoring the moment that had changed everything. The summer sun beat down on the Arizona desert, just as it had on that day a year ago. Richard stood at the edge of the road, looking out at the mountains that rose against the endless blue sky. He thought about Ghost, wherever he was, about the quiet strength he carried, about the wisdom he had shared in those moments in the wreckage. Every day is a choice. Every moment is a chance to start over. Richard had made that choice. He had chosen kindness over cruelty, humility over arrogance, presence over distraction. It had not always been easy. Old habits died hard, and there were days when the old Richard tried to claw his way back to the surface. But he kept choosing. He kept showing up. He kept trying to be better. And slowly, day by day, choice by choice, he had become someone new, someone his son could be proud of, someone who made the world a little brighter, someone worthy of the second chance he had been given. Tyler joined him at the overlook, carrying 2 bottles of water from the car. "Ready to go, Dad?" Richard took the water and smiled at his son. "Almost. I just want to say one more thing." He looked out at the desert, at the road stretching toward the horizon, at the whole vast world waiting to be discovered. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Whoever you are, wherever you are. Thank you." The wind carried his words away, scattering them across the landscape like seeds. Maybe they reached Ghost. Maybe they reached someone else who needed to hear them. Maybe they simply dissolved into the universe, becoming part of the great mystery that connected all living things. It did not matter. What mattered was that they had been spoken. What mattered was that Richard Harrington, who had once laughed at a dirty biker at a rest stop, had become a man who could stand in the desert sun and offer gratitude to a stranger who had saved his life. What mattered was the change. What mattered was the choice. What mattered was the love. If you watched this far, it is because you liked this case. Leave a comment saying, "I watched this far," so I can get to know you and know who really likes the stories on this channel. And if this story touched your heart, if it made you think about the people you have judged unfairly, or the second chances you have been given, then please take a moment to subscribe to this channel. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a story that could change how you see the world. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, someone who is struggling, someone who has made mistakes, someone who needs to know that it is never too late to change, never too late to grow, never too late to become the person you were always meant to be. And leave a like if you believe in the power of unexpected kindness, if you believe that the strongest people are those who lift others up, if you believe that every person you meet might be an angel in disguise. The road is long, and we are all travelers on it. Let us choose to help each other along the way. Because that is how we keep the light alive. That is how we honor the ones who have shown us grace. That is how we become worthy of the second chances we are given. One choice at a time. One moment at a time. One act of kindness at a time. Until the world itself is transformed. The story of Richard Harrington and the biker called Ghost is not just their story. It is our story. It is the story of every person who has ever looked at another human being and seen only what was on the surface. It is the story of every moment we have chosen judgment over compassion, fear over understanding, pride over humility. But it is also the story of redemption, of transformation, of the incredible power that lies dormant in every human heart, waiting to be awakened by a single moment of unexpected grace. May you be that grace for someone today. May someone be that grace for you. And may we all remember, always, that the person we dismiss might be the very one who saves us. That is the lesson of the desert road. That is the gift of the dirty biker. That is the truth that changes everything. Thank you for watching. Thank you for believing. Thank you for being part of this community of stories and hope. Until next time, keep your eyes open for the angels among us. They are everywhere, if only we choose to see them. Richard Harrington learned that lesson on a summer day in Arizona when his car went off the road and a stranger climbed into the wreckage to save him. He carries that lesson with him every day now, in every choice he makes, in every person he helps, in every rock his son places in his hand. The road goes on forever. The journey never truly ends. But with each step, with each mile, with each choice, we have the opportunity to become something better than we were before. That is the promise of the road. That is the gift of the journey. That is the story that never stops being told. And now it is part of your story too. May you carry it with you. May you share it with others. May you live it every day in big ways and small. Because that is how the world changes. One person at a time, one choice at a time, one act of unexpected kindness at a time, until the light overcomes the darkness, until compassion conquers cruelty. Until every person knows what Richard Harrington finally learned on that desert road, that we are all connected, that we all matter, that no one is beyond redemption, and that sometimes the dirty biker at the rest stop is the angel who saves your life.